Hello, everybody. Today, this is your social studies lesson for today, Thursday. We're still on the topic of slavery. It's a serious topic, and like I said in previous videos, not a pleasant part of history, of world history, or American history. But nevertheless, it did happen, so we have to talk about it and learn about it. Okay, so page 122 in your packets talks about slavery in the North. Okay, so I'm going to start reading, so follow along with me. It says slavery in the North. Following the Middle Passage, many enslaved Africans found themselves in English colonies of North America. They were sold in auctions. An auction is a public sale in which the highest bidder makes a purchase. Once purchased, enslaved Africans became the property of colonists. They had very few basic rights. You guys might have seen auctions present day with cars. They do a lot with cars and other items. Unfortunately, back then, they also did it with slaves, with people, actual people. As you could see in the top that's left here is an advertisement for an actual advertisement for slaves. And it even says under, if you see under the caption, right under the advertisement, right here, I'm going to read. Advertisements for slave auctions use adjectives such as valuable, as though human beings were mere objects. Okay, so they had very few basic rights. That's where we left off. Meaning they didn't get to decide what their life was going to be like. They didn't have any access to education or any way of bettering themselves in their lives. So I'm going to go to the second paragraph where it says every colony practiced slavery. So every colony did practice slavery. The Massachusetts Bay Colony passed the first law to allow it in 1641, and then other colonies soon had similar laws. Slavery was most widespread in the South, but it existed throughout the colonies. Many enslaved Africans in the North lived in cities and towns. In the 1750s, for instance, 1 out of 10 residents in the city of Boston was African American. Most of them were enslaved. Some of them worked in shops helping artisans with their work doing skilled work themselves. Others worked in inns as personal servants in the homes of wealthy people. In the cities, slaveholders rarely owned more than 1 or 2 enslaved people. So that's the big difference, probably the biggest difference between North and the South. Slaveholders in the South had a lot more slaves working on plantations, picking cotton and tobacco and crops like that. So a lot of these African Americans were skilled they did skilled work themselves, but they weren't getting paid for it. So they were still considered slaves, and maybe they weren't treated as harshly maybe in some plantations in the South, but nevertheless it was still slavery. If you could see, the graph shows the population, the amount of slaves in the North is the first bar graph, and I know yours isn't colored, but here maybe give you a little bit better idea. The green is the North, and then the South is orange. You could see how it grew much more quickly in the South, and there was much more widespread in the South. So that's like I said, the biggest difference between the North and the South. It was the amount of slaves, also working conditions too. Okay, let's go to page 123. Okay, I'm going to read, so follow along. Some enslaved Africans worked on farms in the North. A successful farmer might keep only 1 or 2 of them. Mostly, though, northern farmers did not grow crops that required large number of workers. For that reason, there were fewer enslaved farm workers in the North. A very few African Americans in the northern colonies were free. Some bought their freedom by saving money from working in shops or selling produce from gardens. Sometimes a slaveholder would set a person free. Free African Americans often lived in the cities of the North. Still, even free African Americans had few rights. For example, they could be kidnapped and taken back into slavery. So there's still that danger there, even if you were free in the North, that you could be kidnapped and taken back into slavery. So it's a constant fear that these people must have felt all the time. I know I would have. If you know that you could be kidnapped at any moment and taken back into slavery. So for number 2, it wants you to use the graph on the other page that we just talked about. This graph right here. So using that graph, compare and contrast how slavery grew in the North and the South between 1670 and 1760. I gave you guys some hints, ways they were alike and ways that they were different, okay? So your job is to find 2 ways that slavery was, 2 similarities between the North and the South, and ways that it was different. Remember, in the North, they still didn't, even though they might not have been working on farms in the heat, they still didn't have that very many rights. So that's one, kind of gave it away. One way it's alike, and ways that they're different. How is it different? Look at the graph, how it was growing in the South compared to the North. Okay, so, and then also watch the I believe it's a YouTube video today that goes along with this lesson. Okay, so we'll pick this topic up next week. This is the last day for social studies this week. Thanks for listening and watching. Okay, be well.